Charles posted a bunch of Timey, Wimey, Timeliney stuff this week, so we're going to cover that and more on this episode of the Escape Podcast for Star Wars: The Old Republic. Our broadcast aspect today is EPC 343. And playing alongside me with her blonde hair today is Seema. Hi, Seema. How's it going?
Hey, Max. It's going pretty well. It's been kind of an interesting week and interesting last 2.5 or 3 weeks for me in SWTOR because, well, let me start by saying last week I did an amazing amount of conquest. I don't know what got into me, but I think I got something like 20 characters. The conquest goal last. Well, I do think I know what got into me. But also this week was the last week of the double XP, so I did finish leveling my scoundrel to 75. And I was also leveling this shadow here, and as you can see, she is at 63 now, so she will get to 75 now, just kind of coasting out, doing conquest, get there soon enough. And then I had also rolled up an agent, an operative that I was leveling, but she only got to like 49. And I have an assassin that's left over from a long time ago in her 50s. So I still have some leveling to go, but yeah, did a lot of leveling during the double XP. I'm happy with that. But what's been sort of taken over my creative thinking in the last few weeks with respect to SWTOR is kind of getting back into, got the fever for making credits.
I got a fever, and the only prescription is more credits.
More credit.
More credit bells. More cowbells that I can sell on the GTN for credits.
And I think that might have been sort of in the back of my mind when I was like, well, and when it takes like 10 or 15 minutes to do conquest on a character, you know, when you haven't done that day, you haven't done the stronghold decorating one and the give a gift to your companion one, and you just can't walk away from that stuff when it could mean, you know, several million credits.
Yeah, I can tell you why you did so much conquest. I could tell you for credits.
For credits, that's right. So I've been doing sort of all the low-hanging fruit stuff. Like I sold all my legendary embers, and I sold I had a kind of a stockpile. Not that I had been hoarding or been collecting them, but I had a bunch of like those grade 6 sort of legendary looking companion gifts. I sold a bunch of invasion forces, which I did not even know people bought those, but they do. I sold a bunch of solid resource matrix, and I still have a few of those things left to sell, but after all that was said and done, I'm almost like 3/4 of the way to Trace Comas.
Really? Well,
Yes.
now you're going to get hungry. Hungry for
Well,
the
yeah.
Trace Comas Club.
Yeah,
and
so
that's going to be
I still
tough.
have every week I'll have a trickle of legendary embers to sell and a trickle of solid matrices to sell. I'm thinking I might make and a trickle of invasion forces, right? Because I'll make them for conquest. And I've been thinking about making dark projects to sell because conquest points, and even though they're expensive to make because you have to buy the IOCAF recombinators on IOCAF for 250,000 credits each, I still might do it because then you sell the dark project, and I haven't done it yet, so this may not work, but they look like they sell for around 700K, so that's a healthy margin. And you get conquest points for making a dark project if you make one every day. So I haven't, like I say, I haven't done. Oh, and I should say, I have something like 270 of the processed isotope stabilizers, so I wouldn't have to buy those.
Oh, those are quite useful and not easy to get because they're going up in price a little bit too.
They're around 20K.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, but they were down around, they were in the teens and even below 10K back in the day.
Well, yeah, so I was looking at those as a possible, like I was going to sell them, but then I think, well, maybe I'll just do this slightly more elaborate thing. slightly more risky thing, but with a much bigger margin. I don't know. What do you think about that idea?
I prefer the bigger margin stuff myself, so I see what you're going for. I like the bigger margin, and some, as I talked about it last week. I'll hold back and not do it if the margins start to squeeze down, because the time to profit is sort of what I'm going after. So if I have to like farm, you can make a lot of profit by running around and farming, grade 11 mats or whatever, but it takes a long, long time, and the time to profit on that, it just wasn't thrilling me. So I will go for the bigger margin and just make sure that the time I spend in game and the profit I gain for the time I spend in game is maximized, because time is money, friend. As opposed to, you might be able to make more money, like in a week, doing other things, but the time in game that you spend might be a lot more. If that
So
makes
in the
sense.
chat room, Zen was asking me how much he said IVs, but I think he meant invasion forces. So I messed up a few times, but they were going anywhere from like 500K to 999K a piece.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I bet.
And people sell them in stacks of 100. I was selling them in stacks of 10.
Yeah, so like 100 million credits. I bet.
Yeah.
Like, I know Zen has used invasion forces for conquest in the past, and how many do you have, Zen? Do you have like stacks of thousands? And if they're volatile, that's another good point. If they're volatile, then you can ride that volatility. If you're really good, that's how, when we had Thon on, that's how he makes a lot of credits.
I mean, what I would do is I would look at them, and there'd be a stack of 100, like 2 pages of stacks of 100 at 555K, and then there'd be like a few pages of stacks of 1 at more, and then then I would put my stack of 10 at like 900K, and then people would buy the stacks of 10. So
right, because they don't want to buy a stack of 100. Yeah, okay, I get that.
All right, Zen, don't work too hard. Talk to you later. Yeah, it's going to go. So so I want to make it all the way. I hope I don't run out of gas before I make it. So and I don't want, and I have to make it farther, right? Like I have to go farther so that I can still,
because then it becomes 0.
Right. I'll be poor if all I have is 1 billion credits, right? So and I want to be able to spend, before I was doing this, I could, whenever I wanted to, I could take a companion and put them to 50 influence. And now I feel like I can't do that at all. So those new characters I was telling you about, they don't have level 50 companions. So they have to like do their own DPS and shit. It's like,
wow.
It's like
That's
I have to kill my own mobs. Yeah. It's almost like playing the game or something.
Hey, companions, Pinterest isn't going to read itself.
Yes. So anyway, I've been spending my time doing that, and that's that. It's weird because it kind of hits all points of the game too. Because like I've done a few space mission. Actually, I've been doing a space mission because that is a conquest target.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a space mission, fairly easy space mission, where you get a rep token, and getting a rep token, applying rep, is a conquest target.
That's right. Okay.
And I'm not in any danger of maxing out on that rep. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But yeah, so it hasn't like I haven't gone down the route of PvP yet in any form, but and I don't think that'll happen either. But anyway, so yes, credits. So, how about you, Max?
I've been doing less on that, so I sort of stopped on the credit grind to some degree. Although I was looking at some prices today, I might pick it back up a little bit this weekend. We'll see. But I did do the A few different things. I poked my head in, although I didn't end up running one. I saw the team running the flashpoints on Friday. That was pretty cool. Had our couple flashpoint groups going after those mounts, the Aerotech
Yep.
mounts.
Yep. We were doing that.
Well, I'm sure we'll mention that again in our guild news. I'm still liking the mandatory fun night stuff we're doing. In fact, we did a nice leisurely run through 16-man Karaga's Palace, and I tanked it, and it was basically max story time the whole night. I was telling all the stories. I even did a little research beforehand, so I would be brushed up
I
on
know you had
my
and you
lore,
had you had new details.
new
It was
facts,
good.
new trivia. Like, did you know that Karaga at the time that we defeat him is about 800 years old? Did you know that? So
I didn't know that. I didn't know he was like the richest hut. Did not even know
he
that.
was the sort of the uber crime lord for about the past 200 years, and he was all riled up because of the over 15 incursions and assault by the Dread Masters into Hut space, taking over Hut space, that he just went nuts and said, "I'm declaring war on everybody, including the Empire and the Republic, and that's why we get sent to stop him. Whether you're on the Empire or the Republic side, that's the assault." So anyway, there you go. But I was doing that all night. Detailed descriptions of the intergluteal cleft of Foreman Crusher, and all the important things that you need to talk about in Karaga's Palace. We had fun tonight with our ops team. We've been bouncing around. We figured let's see if we remember any of our hard mode strategies, and the answer to that is no. But we're having fun remembering and like bringing them up or relearning. You must unlearn what you have learned. We are relearning and unlearning everything. We did Ravagers tonight. Pretty fast fly through the first couple bosses, but we sort of got hung up on torqued ourselves to some degree. I'm not gonna take that any further. Torque beat us up a little bit. Let's just say that Torque fight was quite the clown party, as he went up to a couple things tonight in the sweetest way possible. So there's just a lot going on there, and I don't think back in the day we definitely did kill when we were sort of progression-y earlier in the game's life cycle. We had done Bulo, we had gotten Bulo down hard mode, and we had gotten Sparky down hard mode, but we had not gotten Bula or Torque down, and now I know why. Because there's just a lot. Well, there's a lot of target switching. There's you're getting like 10 extra mobs that you need to either AOE two, maybe three at a time, are spawning once a minute, pretty much, in addition to DPSing the boss. And on IO, on my Merc, Innovative Ordnance, when it's a dot spec, that was getting really kind of frustrating. Because I can put out a bunch of damage and I can spread some of those dots and I can, rotate through. But when you need to burst down like the shoot's laser so that it doesn't kill the repair droids that are going out to repair the consoles that Torque is destroying, it's frustrating to sit there and waste like 3 global cooldowns to lay down my dots and not have the kind of burst that I really used to have or can have if I go Arsenal. So I'm almost thinking like maybe I need to go Arsenal for that fight. Although Arsenal would still even be nice like in the Sparky fight, because in the Sparky fight, having having some hair trigger burst so that you can grab the attention of the pups when they're coming down so they don't immediately jump into the circle and go to the main tank. Again, a lot of target switching, a lot of back and forth. Arsenal's just a lot nicer for target switching than Innovative Ordnance. I can do
Go
it,
Arsenal.
and I did it, but I just prefer
it's not as fun.
Arsenal for target switching. So that's what I've been doing. Been doing a few other things across AIE that we'll maybe talk a little bit about, getting prepared for some things later in the month. But that's the main bit of what I've been doing. Why don't we talk about what BioWare has been doing.
All right.
Now, an Imperial News Network report.
First up in the news, as we've been doing in our news for a while now, is Bug Watch. There's not a lot in Bug Watch this week, but there's one. So just keep up with it. Keep posting those bugs. They are continuing to keep track of them and provide some feedback. The one today is IOCath has broke emitters, and I guess my note here was, I ain't saying she a gold digger, but she ain't messing with no broke emitters. There's the show note for that. Just so
Me
you
either.
know.
I'm not messing with no broke emitters either. I get it.
I ain't
get it.
saying
That's
she
why.
a credit digger.
That's why I don't do IOCath, because I'm not messing with no broke emitters.
Those broke emitters are a little bit of a pain if you're trying to complete that on IOCath, by the way. But not much else. That's fine. Keep track of those bugs, and our community team member there. I think she should sort of put her name there.
I do too.
Let's say hi. Let's get her on the show. Let's
I mean,
talk
unless
about the
oh
bug track
yeah,
work.
that'd be good. Yeah, that's
That'd
a
be kind
great
of cool,
idea. Yeah.
wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
What else would be cool, Seema?
Well, it'd be cool if we would get the All World Swoop Rally, which we are going to. It's going to be starting on June 30th, and it's actually going to, they're saying, coincide with a conquest event of that Swoop Rally. So that's why it's not starting until that week, even though the patch 6.1.2 is coming out in the previous week on Wednesday next week. So I don't know why Wednesday, but it's Wednesday. Or at least that's the date they gave, which is June 20. Could I have said that in any more of a confusing way? The patch is coming on June 24th. The event, which is called All World Swoop Rally, is coming on the 30th.
June in-game events. Bounty Contract Week is through the 23rd. Then the 24th is the patch, which is a Wednesday. I guess we will have a week off, and then the 30th will start the swoop rally. Okay, so they're adding it into the rotation with the week break in between. We had my chair hurts. I've got a week back. You know when I got it? About a week back. So there you get that. There's the number one. And for a double header, this rally event is coming up pretty soon on June 30th. I will get in game and I will say, swoop, there it is.
Oh my God. Look for it, folks. You've heard it here. Brand new humor.
Swoop,
never heard before.
There it is. There you go. Oh, and Seema was questioning why is the patch coming on Wednesday, which is a good question. They don't usually do patches on Wednesday. And in our show notes here, I'll just show you here. She said, "Why Wednesday, my dudes?" And this is what she put in the show notes for me to highlight that, which I thought was awesome. There you go. In guild and community news, at the end of June, Alea Iacta Est is going to have, so this is next Friday, we're going to have a all game streaming weekend on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So Marcus, who is in the chat room right now, from the Working Class Nerds podcast, one of our officers in Star Wars, he is setting this up. He's got a bunch of people helping him out. He's co-running it with Fezgig, one of our officers from World of Warcraft. And it is going to cover almost every one of our major games. So in addition to the core games that we play, like Final Fantasy and Guild Wars and Lotro and Star Trek and Star Wars and Warcraft, it'll even touch on Division 2 and Fallout 76. It's going to be a whole weekend of 2 hours in each of those games. And those 2 hours are going to be mostly focused on, hey, if you're not familiar with starting up in this game, we're going to show you what it looks like. We're going to show you someone who's an expert in the game will show you this is what it's like to create a character. This is what we recommend in sort of starting areas. This is how you will get into the game and get going in your content. And this is how you join the guild. And this is what social looks like. So it's a real jump start into a bunch of these games which is potentially really useful because half of these games, if not more, are free to play. So if
Yeah,
you're,
so
go ahead.
I mean it's a streaming event and you can watch it that way, or you can actually create a character along and jump in the game and come and join in.
Yeah, and ride along and be part of it, which I think is really cool. In addition, at 10:30, these Eastern times, they're completely wrong. Did we even say specifically that this is all Eastern time?
I
We
think
should.
so, yeah.
I mean, I know. Oh, here, our event times are set as Eastern time. Eastern
Earth
time.
Standard Time.
At 9:30 p.m. Central, Center of the Universe time, on Friday there will be an AIE wide town hall. So I'll actually be hosting that. We'll have a couple minutes from each of our major divisions talking about the status of each of the games. We'll talk a little bit about the streaming event. We'll probably have Marcus talk about that for a couple minutes. We'll talk about just where AIE has been in the last few months and where it's going to in the next few months. Just the usual kind of a large gaming community town hall. So you have that to look forward to as well. That is that. What else we got in guild news, Seema?
Just want to mention that we still have Friday nights, every other Friday night or so, master mode flashpoints, working towards the Aerotech mount. And this Friday, no, not this Friday, a week from this Friday will be one, because it's roughly every 2 weeks.
Yeah, and as we said, we jumped in there. We had at least a couple groups running flashpoints on Friday. We've got some people that haven't really even are relatively new to the game, that haven't run a lot of them before. So it's a good time if you want to jump in there, check in with Melung. It's a cool thing, and I'm really glad that they're doing it. And you get those mounts. And if you have that Aerotech ice mount mission in your mission log that's been sitting there for years, as some of us has,
Yes, right.
that's a really great opportunity to clear that out. I love it when I can clear those kinds of missions out of my log. Sir Galahard is in the chat room. Sir Galahard creates a bunch of Star Wars content. He's a streamer and has started up a YouTube channel. There's at least one video up there that I've seen, which is giving some tips about what you can do if you want to get tricky with your chat windows and split off different kinds of chat windows and put them in different places on the screen. It's just a couple-minute video. It was interesting little side tips to remind us all there. Keep an eye out for those, and go check out Sir Galahard on YouTube, on the YouTubes.
Yeah, do it.
Do it. And shout out to the chat room. Thank you, everyone in the chat room. We had a bunch of people in there earlier. Special thanks to Corley for helping balance the audio levels as we started the show. So there's that. All right, Yoda, what you got for me?
Difficult to see. Always in motion is the future.
Yes, the future's in motion, the past is in motion, and all of the timelines of all of the lore are timey, wimey, timeliney stuff. So that is the title of the show that I came up with for today, and I wanted to go through this stuff from Charles because it's relatively detailed. So did you, and I know the answer to this is no, did you study this in detail, Seema, and compare it to your vast knowledge of the exact dates and times when all of these events happened in Star Wars lore?
So I appreciate that there is this rich backstory. I don't know what it is, but I appreciate that it's there because it creates the world that I play in. But no, I did not study it.
So a couple things fascinate me about it as well in that same vein. One is I'm interested, and I've been looking through it a little bit. I'm always interested in the creation process. So Charles, as a writer, what does he do with timelines? Different writers will treat preparation for writing in different ways. Some will have very detailed like flow charts and timelines and, like map everything out and like architect the story before they start writing lines. Others will more focus on character development and write from the point of view of characters and let the characters sort of drive the narrative. Others will unfold a story and plot points and an arc. So I was curious, and it doesn't look like Charles is a timeline purist. You know, it doesn't look like he's coming at it at the story writing mechanically from that perspective. But I think it's still interesting to just sort of go through it and see some of the things that he's talking about, put it together with the way the story's evolved, and I'm sort of learning a little bit along the way, which is kind of cool. And where are we when we're broadcasting today? I came downstairs, Seema, because you can't mount up there on the upper deck of the
great.
Jedi Temple, and I wanted to be showing off some of my mounts here while we were talking.
Okay, I wanted to jump off anyway.
Are you just gonna jump off? Yes,
Uh-huh.
Seema's been defeated. There you go. Do you want me to come res you? Where's your corpse?
It's just not too far from the elevator. I'll be back in a second.
Oh, okay. Well, I will.
I mean, not
you can
my
just-
corpse. My live body is not too far from the elevator.
We are in game here in the Jedi Temple, because this is one of the core elements which drives the Star Wars: The Old Republic timeline. So if you remember in the cinematics, one of the most awesome starting cinematics that was in the lead up to the launch of the game was Malgus stalking into the Jedi Temple, and then his troop transport crashing through the front of the Jedi Temple. It was the sacking of the Jedi Temple. All right, so that was Malgus and Shea Vizsla, and the door opens on the back of the troop transport, and all those red lightsabers light up. Really iconic. That was the moment when Malgus was driving the expansion of the Empire in ways that the Republic was really blindsided by, and the sacking of the temple was one of the key points in the initial war, and it was a genesis of parts of the story which leads to us getting to chapter 1 of our characters. That, though, with the war, the sacking of the temple and the war, all drives towards the sort of the 0-year date that we count from in the Old Republic, which was the Treaty of Coruscant. So that sort of closed down the war and sort of started this uneasy peace and shenanigans behind the scenes and continued hostilities between the Republic and the Empire. But the Treaty of Coruscant was that opportunity for us to also have the start of our class stories, which really started about 10 years after the Treaty of Coruscant. So if you're looking at Charles's post, Seema, and you see ATC, that is Treaty of Coruscant, right?
Right, after the Treaty of Coruscant.
And what is the other BBY, which you know?
Before the Battle of Yavin.
Yes. So the two dates that you're seeing throughout this post that I thought was interesting, you can count either way, is 12 years after the Treaty of Coruscant or 3,641 years before the Battle of Yavin. So it makes a lot of sense for us from the game perspective to be counting from sort of like the Treaty of Coruscant, the lead up to Star Wars: The Old Republic, the start of our class stories around 10 years after the Treaty of Coruscant. That's a good 0 point for us to have to be starting around 36, 39 for our class stories or whatever. It would be kind of annoying. I think. Oh no, that would be 36, 43, because you got to count backwards, because that's all BBY. So that I thought that was interesting. I thought it was interesting to start putting those pieces together then of, okay, there's Treaty of Coruscant, then there was sort of 10 years. And then as we sort of read down here, this class stories beginning at 10 ATC and then Ilum, Battle of Ilum, the end of chapter 3 being at around 12 ATC or maybe 13. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then what did you think in here? So this is where I started getting into Charles's process, which I thought was interesting. And he basically says he was just sort of rolling with it and not like putting a ton of time around it, and sort of explained that that's not too uncommon in Star Wars
Right.
stories, right?
Right. He said that like the whole that oftentimes they put it, the dates come sort of after the fact when other people are analyzing what happened. Sort of.
Right. So when we meet up, even in A New Hope, and Luke is his own old whiny self on Tatooine, we don't see like text on the screen saying, 6 months later, blah blah blah, and the crawl text, isn't saying, 2.5 years later, we catch back up with Luke on Dagobah, blah 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 blah. So they're not bothering to, and it's not important to be really specific about the time. But we as fans can back into it, and that's what a lot of people have done. And in fact, there's like the SWTOR encyclopedia. There's basically references that then have been published after the fact, somewhat official, somewhat canon-y kind of references that then back into those dates, which I thought that was kind of interesting.
And if you read through the thread somewhat, the people who do role play, one of the reasons why they would like to see sort of it nailed down what the years are and have sort of a structure in place is because they create their characters and they interact with the other characters in this world, right? So if everybody agrees on the parameters of the world, then their RP can flow and grow and be better. So that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, okay, that does make sense. That does make sense, because they probably also have different characters that are at different parts of the story, and maybe they're role playing, different things at different times, and you're gonna need to sort of keep track of that in your head canon. If you're in the onslaught, like they're saying here, if you're in the onslaught time frame, that's 26 ATC. So that's 16 years after you started your class story initially. So when you first got your lightsaber, you're now 16 years more mature, potentially, but only 16. It's not like 80 years. You would be playing that and role-playing that in your head, at least, quite differently. I think that's
right.
kind
And
of
it must be, you'd have to know too, like who was dead and who was alive.
Well, that's a different problem. And I wonder, and I think, didn't we hear that like some role-playing guilds try to get really strict about what their canon is? Because for any one of us, who's dead and who's alive, including who's the emperor for the empire,
right,
is different. And boy,
right. Like
that's got to be frustrating.
If you were in like a commando guild, I mean, everyone would have to agree whether Jace Malcolm was alive or dead.
Right. And if you're on the Imperial side, and somebody mentions Asina,
you'd have to know who was emperor. Yeah.
Asina could be dead, or Asina could be emperor. So that's interesting.
Or you could be playing in a time that was before the Alliance.
You could. True. And then that's why these dates might be not only interesting, but sort of critical to how you're going to play it and evolve your story. So here's where he goes. He sort of tries to break it down. I thought this point was quite interesting as well. I like to have the in-game years roughly match IRL years, and so as Onslaught is evolving, say, he's not saying it matches exactly, but if Onslaught came out in the fall and now we're about 6 months later in real lifetime, that's kind of what Charles is sort of mapping to as content is coming out, that the story is happening. Now, between expansions, there could be big jumps. And remember, we were frozen in Carbonite for a while. But I kind of like the idea of as now within an expansion, as real life time passes, that's matching up with story time passing. And that's got to be, I would think from a role play perspective, that's got to be kind of interesting and an interesting way to roll with that.
Yeah.
If we can be, if we can keep meeting up at the bar on the fleet, and saying, man, I haven't heard from Major Henri in a while. I hope we get to hear from her, in the next couple weeks, because blah blah blah. That you can play it. You can play it that way, and you can potentially be on track from a story perspective. So here he breaks it down and goes into a little bit of detail and says, here we go. Here's what it looks like. Battle of Ilum, conclusion of the class story lines is around 13 ATC. So that's about 3 years after the start of Star Wars: The Old Republic and your class stories. Then Black Hole, Terror from Beyond, and Section X sort of released around 14 ATC. So that was about a year later. Rise of the Hutt Cartel was about 15 ATC. Tython Korriban Invasion. Oh man, I forgot about the Tython Korriban Invasion prelude to Shadow of Revan. But that was 16 ATC. So following the sort of releases in real life time there as well, which then drove. So now we're in Revan, which drove towards Zyos, happening around the middle of 17 ATC. And then we get to that Frozen and Carbonite after Zyos and the events of Sacrifice, right before we get to Knights of the Fallen Empire, or actually after we start the story of Fallen Empire, because we get Frozen and Carbonite at the beginning of Fallen Empire. Remember, so the Carbonite sleep happens from 17 to 22 ATC. So we're frozen there. Yeah. So that's 5 years in Carbonite. And that's why all our companions got discombobulated. That's why we sort of they lost track of us. We lost track of them. And that's where all that kind of stuff sort of broke apart. Knights of the Fallen Empire, Chapter 9. So that takes us through 23 ATC. And the Fallen Empire and Kotet towards the end of 23 ATC. Okay. Then Iokath. Iokath comes up on the first half of 24 ATC. Umbara and Kopero in the second half of 24. Nathema Conspiracy in early 25 ATC. And then the attack on Osis, kicking off the renewed war between the Republic and Sith Empire near the end of 25 ATC, which just gets us to Hearts and Minds. And we know Hearts and Minds then was the prelude to Onslaught, and that was 26, early mid 26 ATC, and now we're through the start of Onslaught into the following year after Onslaught, which is continuing. So now we're into that sort of that 27 ATC time range. We've got months here for the story at least to continue to play out. So who knows? We could push into 28 ATC. We could push through the end of the year with some of the evolving story for Onslaught, and see where it takes us into what happens next. All right, so that's a pretty good timeline. So if we're at 27 right now from 10 when we started our class stories, so that's a 17-year gap with 7 in real life. So there are sort of 10 lost years in there when there's sort of only been 5. Did I do the math wrong? 10 ATC for the start of our class stories. 7 to 8 years in game, or no, I guess we're going on 9 years. It'll be 9 years. We're 8.5 years. Are you doing the math there, Seema? On your
No, not in the least.
So you really want to obviously want to dig into this and see where it goes. But it is interesting to see what parts map to real life years, where we expect we're going to be in this timeline, and then you can put the pieces together. Now there was a follow-up post, so let's take a quick look at that. There's a lot of discussion going on in the thread. So you scanned a little bit of that discussion going on in the thread, right, Seema? Was it mostly our peers that were concerned, or what are the concerned parties in the thread? And I can go into it and scroll down a little bit while we're talking too.
Well, I think the person the OP was a role player, and role players chimed in, and then there were a couple of people chiming in that hadn't really thought about it before and made suggestions that were like oversimplified to what the role players were actually thinking about, so they had to be, role play splained. But one thing I did glean from it that I didn't really glean it. I mean, I just read it. It wasn't like mystery, but I hadn't really thought about before, because one guy came in and said, well, the whole thing is really a ridiculous question anyway, because a year is an Earth measurement and the planet Earth wasn't even in the blah, 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 blah. And they're like, well, no, there was such a thing as the Galactic Standard Year, and it was 368 days, and it's measured by the Coruscant standard calendar and blah, 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 blah. And I mean, I hadn't really thought about that before. All the times I've heard BBY and, this year and these many years and all that stuff, I never really thought about it, that a year would have to be defined for the galaxy, that it would mean different things on different planets. Of course, I knew that. I just hadn't thought about it. And so, yeah, it's a thing. 368 days broken into roughly 12 months. It's convenient that it's very similar to our year, too.
Yeah, I guess that helps for us to wrap our heads around it. But
it's based on the time it takes Coruscant to go around its sun.
Which is also interesting that it just happens to be so close, and there happens to be months.
Yeah, right.
I would, again, Star Wars is not science fiction. It's not science fiction. It's fiction. It's more fantasy fiction. Little sciencey bits thrown in here and there as
like
well.
Spaceships.
But I feel like in a lot of very technical science fiction, they might have spent a lot more effort to say, well, what would it really be like for another planet? What kind of calendar would sort of get broken down? And you can get into that in detail in a lot of in sort of more hardcore sci-fi novels. In fantasy, as they say, and as sort of Charles sort of laid it out in the beginning, it doesn't really matter. That's not really the point. We're not trying to be super technical. We're not trying to, tell you the science behind how light speed works on the Millennium Falcon. You can make some of it up. You can make up some sciencey kind of explanations for how the Force works. But once you start doing that, you almost break the story a little bit. So getting a year that's pretty close to what we think of as a year, and getting months that are pretty close to what we think of as a month, and just sort of setting that to the side and not worrying about it, allows you to just wallow in the fantasy in the story. So I get that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if you went too far in defining it technically, that would potentially detract with the way this story is told. So let's see. He did a follow-up, and so watched what some of the continuing dialogue was. Some people were going back and forth. Yes, and Zen, as I didn't want to say it, but if you're trying to you try to go too far to try to explain the science, and you start making up things like midichlorians, you can see why it would go off the rails. And it's better in this just sort of fantasy where we're telling this fantasy story to not do that, as a very good case in point. Midichlorians. Anyway. So Charles came back yesterday, day before yesterday, Tuesday. Charles came back on Tuesday. He posted the first post on Monday, came back on Tuesday and said, hey, I see some more of this discussion. Some people were trying to clarify a little bit further. Prologue begins in 10, chapter 2 begins in 11, and chapter 3 starts in late 12. Okay. And he says, yes, that's about what he's seeing and how it parses out. He'd want to emphasize that the general timeline for all the class stories collectively and not written in stone interpretation of each and every one specifically. That's another important point is remember all the storylines for all the class stories interweave but aren't exactly one-to-one. They all do sort of come together at the end. So they all sort of merge at the battle for Ilum. But before that, they're a little bit looser, and they cross over each other a little bit, and they might not even necessarily have started exactly at the same time. Sorry, I've been talking a lot today. I'm a little choked up there, a little verklempt. What else was clarified? Darth Skavik saying she hasn't risked open combat in a decade. That was not meant to be taken literally. It's more general amounts of time. Again, you try to pin down any of that dialogue too close, and you pull back that curtain a little bit too much, and things could break down a little bit. So roll with it a little bit. So Darth Skavik saying last time she fought anyone directly was a decade ago, which isn't necessarily the same thing as last time she fought the player was exactly 10 years ago.
Right.
That's fine. I'm okay with that. And then finally, Ben Katarn here says, the way I understood it, Kira and Scourge destroyed Vitiate's body about the same time that Knights of the Eternal Throne, Chapter 9, was taking place. After that, they got knocked out for more than a year because that was part of that story that we're hearing now, that they sort of got taken offline by the kickback of what they were doing there. This would still not necessarily have to mean that they immediately went to Odessen after waking up. Right. So it's not, this, then this, and this, and this, and this. Maybe they went and hung out at the cantina for a while. Maybe they went to Ryza and hung out on the beaches for a while.
Probably not Ryza, but go ahead.
What did you say?
Probably not Ryza, but your point is taken.
Hey, I'm going to be hanging out on Ryza in a couple weeks, I think.
In your bathing suit? In your sandals?
I have my captain in Star Trek Online does have a special outfit for Ryza. Yes. Anyway, Charles does say, great job, Ben Katarn. Ben's on a roll. That is sort of how it's intended. Kira and Scourge didn't immediately wake up and decide that they're going to race off to Odessen. And even when they did, they spent some time observing the player character before making contact in Onslaught. And in fact, as we start to meet them on Odessen, or on I think that happened on Onderon, where we have our encounter with Scourge.
Yes.
They're still, throughout all of that, they're checking us out. They've been scoping us out for a while. There's a little bit of a test that's going on there. They wanted to make sure that we weren't still infected or harboring the Emperor in our heads. So that's all part of that whole process. And so there's a timey-wimey stretch of time in there that we could be playing with. And that's what we need to be thinking about. And that's what Charles is sort of thinking about when those stories are getting written and why they don't have to line up exactly. This was interesting. Again, getting back to process and the writing. He says, my copy of Annihilation is stuck in the office. So his copy, the stuff that he used to write out the story sounds like, I don't know. It sounds like it's a hard copy, doesn't it? The way he talks about it. My copy of the Annihilation is stuck
Yeah.
in the
No.
office, so I don't
Yes.
have it handy to refer
Right.
to.
Right. Right. It's like a little paperback book that he had like in on his desk or something.
Do you think? And I'd love to ask him. This is this kind of process stuff that I'm interested in. Some writers like to take, like the big pencils and a notepad or a moleskine. And different people say that word different ways. A moleskin or a moleskine, a little notebook.
I've
I've
never heard moleskine.
I
But go ahead.
I heard a professional anyway, and I'm not making that up. I didn't make that up.
I know. Okay. All right.
Anyway, moleskin. Then fine. They like to take little notebooks or loose leaf paper. And what were the kind of big fat pencils? Somebody reminds me what those awesome big fat classic pencils were. I used to do work with an old school advertising firm called Leo Burnett. They're now part of some of the big advertising conglomerates. I think they're owned by BCom3 or one of the French big ad firms. But Leo Burnett was a guy. Leo Burnett founded the ad firm, and he had all these little quips and phrases. Leo Burnett's the ad firm that invented the Jolly Green Giant back in the day and Tony the Tiger. Anyway, they if you went into their conference rooms back in the 90s when I worked with them, they'd have these big pencil jars with the big fat pencils in them. And then there was some slogans on the walls that said, one of them was, "Big ideas require big pencils." I don't know why that they thought that was super important to them, but that was part of their company culture. So they had the cool, the awesome old school big pencils. I want to say like Skyline or Starlight pencils or whatever they were. But anyway, so I wonder if Charles has big pencils and that's where he writes this stuff out. And he's got a bunch of handwriting and like he sits under a big shady tree and pencils out in his notebook all his story for like Annihilation here. And he left that, it's like maybe he did some old school binding on it and like has it in the office now. I would love to see that. That would be really cool. But he says he doesn't have the copy ready to reference. He doesn't have it on hand. But if there is a conflict between that and the encyclopedia with regards to date, he says, fine, go with the encyclopedic version. Because they were published very close together, so if there are any conflicts, they're just likely a result of miscommunication or simple typos, not intentional revision. The encyclopedia was written specifically to serve as a reference for details like this. Annihilation is a reference for story, first and foremost, not for the mechanics or the dates. So there we're getting more into that process. And then he says, Drew Karpyshyn, who's one of the on the dev team there, is way too nice and talented and successful and clearly needs to be taken down a peg or two if the opportunity presents itself and there is any conflicts. Drew's tweet about Annihilation following the class stories in 3640 BBY fits with the encyclopedia, putting Ilum in that year, so that already lines up. So fine. And then he wraps it up by saying, one last point of clarification with regard to the in-game releases, roughly following the timeline in real life. He said, I really do mean roughly. So it's not day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month. In fact, as we just learned, the years don't even necessarily match up exactly. Everything released in the same IRL year is generally about the same, happening in the same game year. And I would tend to think about it, and in my head, I was already thinking, even the bets are off even a little bit more between expansions, and they probably have, as we saw with 5 Years in Carbonite, for Knights of the Fallen Empire. So he says just because one patch was released in April and another one was in July doesn't mean it was exactly 3 months apart. There's plenty of room for interpretation based on what's actually happening in each story. And if you really need a sciencey detail for it, just think about the relative velocities of your character traveling on starships closer or further from the speed of light, and how that might impact the changing relativistic timeline and time periods of both your character and the story. So there you go. That's a little gift from me to the RP community, which I'm sure
I'm
they
sure
didn't
it
ask
will be
for
well
and
appreciated.
don't want and don't care about. All right, so interesting. I know this isn't like something that you're like sketching out and like drawing on a whiteboard in your office, Seema. But at least that writing process part, that's definitely interesting to me. And then being able to put some of it back and forth together with how people are putting their stories together and how the timelines are working, I think that's relatively interesting.
I mean, and I get this. I get the desire. I totally get the desire, because I have the same desire, just about different things. Different nerdy things, different detailed things, just not this thing.
Right. Not this specific one, but
Right.
this is a thing you can go after and you can
Yeah.
really lock down, which is kind of cool. As Charles says in the thread, enjoying the conversation. Please keep the thoughts coming. Feel free to jump in that thread if you want to continue to brainstorm and talk about that timeline and those differences and how that's evolving. And send us your comments and questions and clarifications as well. I'm sure we aren't 100% right on whenever we talk about lore, especially because we're not lorists as the case may be. But we are interested in we're interested in lore at a macro level regardless. And two, I'm always interested in what other people are interested in. So if there's something that you're really passionate about in terms of the lore or the timeline or the class story or how you're constructing your character's class story or the RP in a big way, I'm interested in hearing about that myself. Any closing comments from you, Seema, before we wrap it up here today?
Yeah, I want to comment on something that RJar75 said earlier. He made a comment about an interaction that happened between Kaleo and I think it was the one of the not the agent, but one of the other in one of the other class stories, and it made me remember that there's a few little in all the class stories. There's a few little things dotted through where it's a companion from one class story does something with a companion from another class story.
Yeah.
And I just love those little touches in the story, and I was just thinking that it would be cool to have like maybe a series of short stories between companions.
That's a really good idea. That right there, the sort of the short stories about sort of especially expanding on some of those interactions. But that gets to what I was mentioning earlier. The interweaving of the class stories. There's different events that are referenced back and forth, and that's a really great example of
the knight. Yeah, okay.
Of the different companions mentioning other companions and events and that kind of thing in other stories. I think that is really, really cool. All right, I think with that, though, our story for this evening has come to an end. Our timeline will be wrapping up here at 11:59 p.m. Central, Center of the Universe time in the Midwest. Our SWTOR Escape Podcast 343 droid is ready to head out and broadcast this podcast to all of you. So please keep up with us on Twitter at MaxTheGray and at AIESEMA. And if you know any people that should be playing with us, please go tell them to come find us on Twitter or on YouTube /New Overlords, our twitch.tv /New Overlords, or especially on our guild website, aie-guild.org. Remember, we've got our streaming weekend where if you want to get started with AIE, it's a great place to catch up and see what's going on. That's happening in a week from now. Please tell those people to come check us out. That's why we do this show. We're interested in getting those people in and playing with us and coming, especially if you're new to Star Wars. That's one of my favorite things is running with people on Tuesday nights, especially, and talking about everything that's new and neat, and having that opportunity to introduce someone else into the stuff that we really have fun with. So do that, and with that, we will talk to you soon.
Later, everyone.